They told me on the first day that I would not amount to much, and they were polite about it, which was somehow worse. I had been at the provisioning college at Tal Vesh for less than a tide cycle when the intake clerk ran the long pale instrument down the side of my neck and made a sound I would come to know well, a soft descending click, like a latch giving up. The instrument was reading me. Not my blood, not my bones. It was reading what I carried. The Vesson measure a person by the feedstock they hold in reserve, the refined slurry that their printers turn into food, and they smell it the way I might smell rain coming without thinking, as plain fact about the world. A cadet who arrives carrying full cartridges smells to them like someone important. I arrived carrying a satchel of dirt and a tin of seeds, and to the clerk I smelled like nothing at all. Less than nothing. I smelled of decay, which to them is the smell of danger. Low yield, the clerk said, and entered it against my name, and that was that. I want to be honest about how I got there, because later people made it into something grander than it was, and grandness is a kind of lie. There was no destiny in it. A transit manifest had been corrupted somewhere between the relay stations, and the corruption had taken the field where my specialty was recorded and replaced it with a code that, in the Vesson system, meant something close to resource cadet survival track. On Earth I had keepered a seed vault and worked an orchard collective in the cold uplands, which is to say I knew how to coax life out of ground that did not want to give it, and how to wait, and how to put my hands in things other people would not touch. None of that translated. The machine saw a code, and the code meant I belonged in a hall full of people training to feed a colony, and so a shuttle came, and I was too tired and too far from home to argue with a shuttle. The Vesson are tall. That is the first thing your body learns about them before your mind catches up. They stand a head and a half over a tall human, and they are narrow, and their skin has a faint give to it like the rind of a soft fruit, a pale waxy gray that darkens at the joints. They have no mouths in the way I understood mouths. They feed through intake ports along the underside of the jaw, slotted things that open to receive a measured dose of printed slurry and close again, clean, sterile, exact. They do not chew. They do not taste the way I do. The idea of putting a whole unbroken thing into the body, a fruit, a root, a piece of bread, strikes them as both filthy and reckless, and after a while I understood why. Their insides cannot handle complexity. They have no garden in their gut the way I do, no quiet riot of small lives breaking food down. Everything they eat must be broken down first, outside the body in the printers. A Vesson who swallowed an apple would not be insulted. They would be poisoned. They would die of the apple the way I might die of a wound. So their whole science is the printer. Their whole status is the cartridge. Their highest caste is the cultivators, who do not cultivate anything that grows, the word survived from some older meaning, but who manage the great printer banks that turn refined feedstock into the soft gray nutrient paste the colonies run on. A cultivator who can stretch a feedstock supply, who can keep a colony fed through a famine of cartridges, is the closest thing the Vesson have to a hero. They make statues of them. They are good statues. I learned to read them. Cultivation master Varen Os ran the survival track, and Varen Os was the most polite person I have ever been afraid of. I met him on the third day. He came down the tiers of the lecture pit. They teach in pits, not halls, the instructor at the bottom and the cadets ranked above, which I found backwards until I understood that to them the low point is the place of honor, the bottom of the bowl where everything that matters collects. He moved without hurry. His skin was very dark at the joints, almost black, which I would learn meant age and rank. He had a way of folding his long hands together that I came to dread, because it meant he had decided something about you, and was being kind enough not to say it yet. You are the human, he said, not unkindly. He said it the way you might say to a child, you are the one who broke the window, already forgiving it, already certain. Myra Quell, I said. Quell? He tried the word in his mouth that was not a mouth, the sound coming from somewhere in his throat, and made it sound like a small machine settling. You carry no feedstock. No. Your colony sent you with none. My colony doesn't use feedstock. A long pause. The cadets above us had gone still in the way a field goes still before weather. "Then how?" said Cultivation Master Os, with what I now believe was genuine curiosity, the polite curiosity of a man examining an insect he has not catalogued. "Does your colony eat?" I could have explained it. I could have stood in that pit and explained soil and seed and season, compost and root and rain, the whole slow green machinery I had grown up inside. But I was 23 and tired and a long way from anyone who loved me, and I had already learned in 3 days that the more I said the more they smiled, so I said the only thing that was both true and short. "We grow it," I said. He folded his hands. "Yes," he said gently, "we have records of that. It is a very unreliable way to live." And that was the kindest he ever was to me, and I did not know it yet. The lien was announced at the end of my first tide month, and the announcement was a celebration, which tells you something about the Vesson. Every survival cadet at Tal Vesh runs the lien once. It is the spine of the track, the test the whole curriculum bends toward. The principle is simple and in its way beautiful. Provisioning is the highest art, so the highest test is to provision under deprivation. They seal a cohort of cadets into a chamber, the dead chamber, the cadets call it, though never in front of an instructor, with a fixed and inadequate supply of feedstock cartridges, and they leave them there. The trial runs until the chamber is empty of cadets, one way or another. A cadet who survives by managing their feedstock with perfect discipline, who comes out the far side still standing while others have starved or panicked or burned through their ration in fear, that cadet has shown the central Vesson virtue. They have shown that they can stretch a finite supply across a famine. They have shown they can be trusted with the colony's life. There is no resupply. That is the whole point. The chamber is sealed. The feedstock you carry in is the feedstock you have. When it is gone, and what you do then is the measure of you. Most cadets ration. The brilliant ones ration brilliantly, dividing their cartridges into doses so small the body barely registers them, walking the long gray edge between hunger and collapse for as long as they can. The lean is not survived by the strong. It is survived by the disciplined. The statues in the Great Hall are all of disciplined people. They told us this would be hard. They told us cadets had died. They did not seem to think this was a reason not to do it, and on reflection I have stopped being sure they were wrong, though I will never feel about it the way they do. My cohort was 11, 10 Vesson and me. I want to tell you about a few of them because later, when the story got told, they vanished into a single word, the cadets, and that is not fair to them. They were not a word. They were people in the way that matters, even if they were not people in the way I am. There was Surium, who hated me on sight, and who I would have hated back if I had not been too busy. Surium was elite. His family ran a printer bank on one of the inner colonies, and he had arrived at Tal Vesh carrying more feedstock than any other cadet in the track, more than some instructors, and the smell of it preceded him like a banner. The other cadets deferred to him without seeming to decide to. He smelled like someone you defer to. He found my presence in the cohort an insult, the dirt thing, the low yield, the contamination they had let in by clerical error, and he was not subtle about it. The first time we passed in a corridor he turned his head aside, the Vesson gesture for refusing assent, refusing to acknowledge that I carried any standing at all. He did it every time after that. I stopped noticing eventually. You can stop noticing almost anything if you have work to do. There was Eshrit, who was small for a Vesson and anxious in a way I recognized, who rationed everything in her life, not just feedstock, her words, her movements, her sleep. There was Tovin, who was Surium's opposite, easy and loud and generous, who once tried to share a dose of his slurry with me before someone told him in a horrified whisper that I could not intake it, that I was not built for ports, and who looked so genuinely sorry afterward that I forgave the whole species a little for an afternoon. There was old Casteth, who was not old but who moved like he was, slow and considered, and who watched me longer than the others did, the way Os watched me, but without the smile. And there was me, who carried no feedstock and a tin of seeds, and a head full of a grandmother's voice telling me things about dirt. We were sealed into the chamber on a gray morning, and I will tell you what the chamber was, because the chamber is the heart of this. It was bigger than I expected, a long, low vault perhaps 80 paces by 40, lit from above by a flat, even light the Vesson favor, a light with no warmth and no shadow, the light of a place where nothing is meant to grow. The floor was a hard, pale composite, sealed and sterile. The walls were the same. There was water, they are not monsters, the Vesson. The lean is deprivation of feedstock, not of water, delivered from a recycling spigot in the far wall that gave as much as you wanted, clean and flat and tasteless. There were sleeping alcoves cut into one long wall, 11 of them, and a waste reclamation system, and a row of intake stations where a cadet could load a cartridge and receive their dose. And there was, against the back wall, a thing I did not understand at first and came to love. A biomass recycler, a great dark hopper where the chamber composted its own organic waste, Vesson waste, food scrap, the dead matter of a sealed system, and turned it into a sterile sludge that fed back into the recyclers. To the Vesson it was a sanitation unit, a thing for making filth safe. They walked past it the way you walk past a drain. I looked at it for a long time on the first day, while the others were settling in, claiming alcoves, checking their cartridge counts, beginning already the slow arithmetic of survival. I looked at that dark hopper full of rot, and something in my chest that had been clenched since the shuttle began, very slowly, to ease. Because here is the thing the Vesson did not know, the thing their whole brilliant, brittle science had no room for. They had sealed me in a dead chamber to starve, and they had given me a composter, and they had given me water, and they had given me light, and I had brought seeds. They thought they had taken everything from me. They had taken nothing I needed. I did not start fast. That is the part people get wrong when they tell it. They imagine I walked in and made a garden bloom, some single bright miracle, the dirt witch and her green hands. It was not like that. Nothing alive is like that. The first days I mostly watched and slept and learned the chamber and let the Vesson forget I was there. I had perhaps a double handful of seeds in my tin, what I had carried from home, kept for no reason except that a seed keeper does not travel without seeds the way another person does not travel without their own name. Hardy things, upland things, bred over generations of my collective to grow in cold and thin soil and short seasons, to germinate fast and forgive neglect. Bean and grain and a tough leafy thing we called winterhand that would grow in almost anything. A few tubers which mattered more than I knew at the time. I had no soil to speak of, a satchel's worth, maybe 2 kilos, the dirt I'd carried out of sentiment, which is the only kind of dirt worth carrying. 2 kilos of soil will not grow a chamber's worth of food. I knew that on the first day. So the first thing I did before I planted anything was begin to make more. This is the part the Vesson could not watch. I went to the biomass recycler and I learned its cycle and I began quietly to divert it. Not all of it, I am not a thief, and besides I needed the system running. But the recycler took organic waste and rendered it sterile, and sterile was exactly what I did not want. I wanted it half done. I wanted rot. So I built in the corner of the chamber furthest from the alcoves, behind a sleeping bay screen I unbolted and moved, a pile, a compost heap. Vesson food scrap and waste, the husks of spent cartridges that turned out to be a pressed organic fiber, my own waste, water, the 2 kilos of home soil spread thin across the top of it like a starter culture. Because soil is not dirt, soil is alive. Soil is 10,000 small lives per pinch. And those lives were the only tools I truly needed, and I had carried them 10,000 light years in a satchel without knowing I would. The Vesson smelled it within a day, and the chamber nearly turned on me. You have to understand what rot is to them. To me, a compost heap smells like the best thing in the world, like richness, like the engine of everything green, a warm, dark living smell. To them, it is the smell of death uncontained. It is the smell of the thing their bodies cannot survive, raw organic complexity, microbial load, The wild breaking down they spent 1,000,000 years building printers to escape. When my pile began to work, began to heat the way a good pile heats, began to throw that smell into the flat dead air of the chamber, the vessel reacted the way you would react to a corpse left in your bedroom. Tovin was sick. They can be sick. It is not pleasant. I will not describe it. Eshrit pressed herself into the farthest alcove and would not come out. And Surium came across the chamber with his long hands not folded but spread, the Vesson gesture for a threat, and stood over my pile and told me to destroy it. "It will kill us," he said. He was not entirely wrong, and that is what made it hard. A high enough microbial load in that sealed air could genuinely have sickened them. "You will contaminate the air cycle. You will kill every cadet in this chamber with your filth." I looked up at him from where I was crouched, turning the pile with a flat panel I'd pried loose for the purpose, and I was very tired and very far from home, and I did not have it in me to be afraid of him just then. "I'll contain it," I said. "I'll seal it. The air cycle scrubs harder than you think," I checked. "It'll hold the load. You won't breathe a spore." I held his stare, which you are not supposed to do to a Vesson of standing. "And in about 40 days, when your cartridges are gone and you're lying in your alcove doing the arithmetic of how many more doses you have, this pile is going to be the only food in this room. So I'd think about whether you want me to destroy it." He did not believe me. None of them believed me. Why would they? Their whole science said it was impossible. You do not provision from filth. You provision from feedstock, from cartridges, from the printer, from discipline. The dirt thing's pile was a contamination and a delusion both, and the kindest of them pitied me for it. But I sealed the pile well. I am good at sealing piles. My grandmother taught me that a compost heap is a thing you tend like a fire, never neglected, never abandoned, and the air cycle held. And after 3 days, when no one had sickened from it, the chamber went back to ignoring me, which was all I had ever wanted. The cartridges began to run out on the 11th day. Not all at once, and not for everyone at the same rate, and the manner of each cadet's running out told me who they were more truly than anything they said. The lean is supposed to be survived by discipline, by rationing, and the Vesson had drilled rationing into these cadets since they were small, the way I had been drilled in waiting. So most of them rationed, and rationed well. But rationing is a strategy for a finite supply, and the cruelty of the lean, the thing that makes it the test it is that no amount of discipline makes a finite supply infinite. You can stretch a thing. You cannot stretch it forever. Discipline only changes the date of the end. It does not change that there is an end. Eshrit rationed too hard. That was the first failure, and it was the saddest, and I think about it still. She was so afraid of running out that she ate too little dose after careful dose, each one smaller than her body needed, and she did the math wrong in the direction of fear, and somewhere around the 18th day, her body simply began to shut down faster than her caution could account for. She had more than half her cartridges left when she collapsed. She had starved herself to save food she never got to eat. They took her out. The chamber has a medical extraction protocol. The lean kills cadets, but it tries not to, and she lived. I learned later, though her track was over and the rest of us watched the wall seal behind her stretcher and said nothing, because there was nothing to say, and because each of us was doing our own arithmetic and her removal had just changed the variables. Tovin failed the opposite way. And faster and louder. Generous, easy Tovin could not bring himself to ration against the others. When Casteth's count ran low, Tovin gave him a dose. When a younger cadet whose name I never learned panicked on the 14th day, Tovin calmed him with a share of his own slurry. He could not watch the people around him be hungry and keep his own supply selfishly intact. It was not in him. It was the best thing about him, and it killed his trial. He burned through his cartridges feeding other people's fear, and he ran dry early, and when he ran dry the others, disciplined, frightened, doing their own math, did not feed him back because the math did not allow it. He sat in his alcove on the 22nd day with empty hands, and the easy loudness went out of him, and he got quiet in a way that frightened me more than any of it. I gave him water. I had nothing else he could take. His body could not eat anything I could grow. That was the thing that broke something in me, if I am honest. I had begun by the 22nd day to have food. Not much. The first beans had come up out of my pile in their fast, hardy upland way, and the winter hand was throwing leaves, and the grain was a green haze across the top of the heap, and I had eaten, actually eaten, chewed, swallowed whole living food in that dead chamber while the Vesson starved around me, and it had felt obscene and necessary at once. But none of it could go into Tovin. His ports could not take it. His body could not break it down. I had a garden coming up in the corner of a room where a kind man was starving, and I could not feed him because the same biology that let me grow it was the biology he did not have. I have carried that. It does not get lighter. They extracted Tovin on the 24th day alive, and his track 2 was over, and the chamber was down to 7, and one of the 7 was me, and I had food, and I had not been able to share it with the one of them I would most have wanted to. Surium lasted longest of the Vesson, because Surium was the most disciplined and the most well-supplied, and the most determined that the dirt thing would not outlast him. He had arrived with more feedstock than anyone, and he rationed it with a cold brilliance that I could not help but respect. He divided his doses smaller than I would have believed a body could run on. He moved less each day to spend less. He slept more. He turned himself into a machine for stretching a finite thing across an infinite need, and he was magnificent at it. And he was, the whole time, watching my corner of the chamber with a hatred that had curdled into something more complicated, because by the 30th day it was no longer possible to pretend the pile was only filth. There was green in the dead chamber. There was a low, rough field of it in the far corner, beans climbing a frame I'd built from sleeping bay slats, winter hand broad and dark, grain heading out, the tubers I'd planted late just beginning to show. The compost had grown. I'd kept building it, kept feeding it the chamber's waste, kept turning it, and 2 kilos of home soil had become a corner of living ground because soil makes more of itself if you let it, if you feed the small lives and give them time. The smell had stopped being death to the Vesson and become something else, something they had no word for, because they had never in their long printer-fed history stood inside a sealed room that smelled of growing things. It unsettled them more than the rot had. The rot at least they understood as danger. The green they did not understand at all. And I was not magnificent. I want to be clear about that because the story got told as though I were. I was not disciplined and cold like Surium, stretching a finite thing with brilliant restraint. I had simply brought a different kind of thing, a thing that was not finite, a thing that made more of itself, a thing that started at nothing and compounded. While Surium divided his last cartridges into doses too small to live on, my corner threw a second crop. I did not beat him. The arithmetic beat him. He was running down a supply and I was running up a system, and there is no discipline in the universe that lets subtraction win against growth, given time, and the lean gave us time. That was its whole cruelty, and it turned out to be, for me, its whole gift. Surium sabotaged the pile on the 33rd day. I expected it sooner. He came across the chamber in the low light while I slept, and he tore the frame down and trampled the beans and kicked the compost across the sterile floor and fouled the water line to the corner, and he did it not out of strategy. There was no strategy left for him. His cartridges were nearly gone, but out of something older and more human than he would have wanted to know he shared with me. He could not bear it. He could not bear to starve to death by inches in a dead room while the contamination, the low yield, the dirt thing, ate fresh food grown from filth in the corner. So he tried to kill the thing that was beating him. I understood it completely. I have wanted to do the same to things I could not beat. It is one of the most human things there is, and he did it. And I have never told anyone before now that for one moment, watching the wreckage of 2 months' patience scattered across that floor, I hated him with a purity that scared me. And then I knelt down and began to put it back because that is what you do. That is the whole of it really, the only secret I have. A pile gets kicked over and you build it again. A frost takes the seedlings and you plant again. A season fails and you keep the seed back and you plant again. My grandmother buried 2 children and an orchard and a husband, and planted every spring until the spring she died. And she taught me with her hands more than her words that the answer to ruin is not despair and is not revenge. The answer to ruin is that you start again in the morning, because the ground does not care about your grief, and the seed does not care about your rage, and the only thing that has ever worked, the only thing, across every cold upland year of my people, is to get up and put your hands back in the dirt. So I put my hands back in the dirt. I salvaged what beans I could. I rebuilt the frame. I gathered the scattered compost back into a heap and re-wetted and turned it. It set me back maybe 12 days. It did not stop me. Nothing in that chamber could stop me because I was not a finite supply being depleted. I was a living system being interrupted, and a living system, if any part of it survives, regrows. Surium watched me rebuild it. He had expended the last of his strength on the wrecking, and he had nothing left, and his cartridges by then were truly gone, and he sat against the wall with his long hands open and empty, and watched the dirt thing kneel in the wreckage he had made and patiently, without a word to him, undo it. I think that was the moment, more than any other, that the thing in him broke and reset. Not when I grew the food, when I rebuilt it after he destroyed it. Because the food he could call luck or contamination or some low-yield trick, but the rebuilding he could not call anything but what it was, which was the thing his own species had spent 1,000,000 years engineering out of their food supply: resilience, the capacity to lose everything and have it come back. The Vesson had made their provisioning perfectly efficient and perfectly brittle, a printer and a cartridge, magnificent until the cartridge runs out, and then nothing, then death, then a statue. And here was a low-yield contaminant who had been kicked flat and was simply, quietly, growing back. He asked me for food on the 38th day. He did not have the strength to be proud about it. He had refused my scent in every corridor for 2 months. He turned his head aside even then when he asked, the gesture and the request canceling each other out, a man asking for his life from a thing he could not admit had standing. And the cruelty of it, the same cruelty that had taken Tovin, was that I could not give it to him. His body could not eat what I grew. I had a corner full of food and a starving man in front of me, and the same wall between us that had always been there, the wall of biology, the wall of what each of us was built to be. I could grow it. He could not eat it. We were not the same animal, and no amount of either of us wanting it could make us the same. But I had been thinking about that wall for a long time by then. 38 days of thinking while my hands worked. Because Tovin had taught me, by dying not dying in his alcove, that growing food the Vesson could not eat was a hollow kind of victory, and I am not built for hollow victories. I am built to feed people. That is what an orchard is for. So I had been working in the back of the same mind that tended the pile on the wall. The Vesson cannot eat complexity. Their bodies need food broken down first, outside them, the way a printer breaks feedstock down into slurry. They have no garden in their gut to do the breaking. Fine. I had spent 38 days running in the corner of a dead chamber, the oldest external breaking down machine my species owns, older than the printer, older than the wheel, older than the plow. I had been fermenting. You cannot ferment without thinking about it if you grow food in the cold. We brewed, we soured, we preserved. A winter people lives off the controlled rot of autumn's surplus, off the small tame deaths we coax into our food to keep it and to break it down and to make it safe across the long dark. Fermentation is rot you have made obedient. It is the wild breaking down of the compost heap, brought indoors and tamed and pointed at a jar. And fermentation does to food exactly what a Vesson body cannot do for itself. It breaks the complexity down, outside the body, before it is eaten. It pre-digests. It turns a thing a Vesson cannot survive into a slurry of simple sugars and broken proteins and tamed acids, into something not so different in the end from what comes out of their printers, except that mine came out of a jar and a month and a handful of beans grown from filth. I had been brewing for 3 weeks. I had not been sure it would work. I'm still not entirely sure why it worked. I am a farmer, not a chemist, and I was working from a grandmother's recipes and a desperate hope. fermenting beans and grain and winterhand in salvaged cartridge husks with water and thyme, and the same wild small lives that ran my compost, then testing the result against everything I could remember about Wesen biology, which was not enough. Which is why I tested it on a sealed sample through the chamber's own analysis port before I would have dreamed of offering it to a living being. The analysis came back and I read it 4 times, and I sat down on the floor of that dead chamber and I put my face in my dirt-black hands, and I did not cry, but I came close because the numbers said it was safe. Broken down enough, simple enough, tamed enough. A slurry a Wesen body could take. I made it from food I grew from a pile I built from the chamber's own waste in a room they had sealed to starve me, and on the 38th day, I poured a measure of it into a clean husk, and I carried it across the chamber to where Surium sat dying against the wall with his head turned aside, and I crouched in front of the most arrogant person I had ever met, who had tried to kill the only thing keeping me alive, and I held it out. "It's broken down," I said. "It's safe. I ran it through the port. You can check the analysis yourself. Your body can take it." I set it on the floor between us because he could not make himself reach for it from my hand. "It's not feedstock. It's not from a printer. It came out of the dirt. I need you to know that before you take it, because if you take it, you don't get to call my corner filth anymore." He looked at the husk for a long time. A starving man looks at food the way a drowning one looks at air, and there is no pride in that look. No caste, no standing, just the animal that wants to live. He picked it up. His long hands shook, and he raised it to the intake port under his jaw, and he took it in, the first thing he had eaten in days. Food of Wesen had never in the history of his people eaten, food that had grown, and his whole narrow frame shuddered with it, and he did not die. He did the opposite of dying. I watched it go through him, and I watched the gray come back from the edge of him, and I watched, on the face of the cadet who had turned his head from my scent for 2 months, something I had no name for because I had never seen a Wesen weep, and I am still not certain that is what it was, but it is the closest word I have. "How long," he said when he could speak, "can you make this?" "As long as I have a pile," I said. "Forever, basically. That's the whole point of it. That's the part you never understood." I sat down across from him on the floor of the dead chamber. "You can't run out of a garden. You can only fail to plant one." I fed all 6 of them after that. It took the rest of the lean, and the lean ran another 19 days, because once I was provisioning the cohort there was no failure by starvation to end it, and the chamber simply waited, its arithmetic broken, for an instructor to decide what to do with a deprivation trial in which no one was being deprived. I fed Surium and Casteth, and the 3 whose names I have not given you, and the young one who had panicked. I built a second pile and then a third. I expanded the corner into a third of the chamber. I taught Casteth, who watched everything, how to turn a heap. He was clumsy at it and serious about it, and he is, I have heard, growing things now on a colony world, which is a sentence I never expected to be able to write. I fermented in batches. I grew a surplus so far past what the 6 of them needed that I was pouring the excess back into the recycler, feeding my own waste stream, closing the loop, running in that sealed dead room, the one thing the Wesen had built their entire civilization to avoid needing, a system that fed itself. They came for us on the 57th day, not because anyone had failed. Because cultivation master Varen Os had finally come to the observation gallery to see for himself the thing his instruments had been reporting, and his mind had been refusing, and he had stood at the long window above the chamber and seen a garden where he had sealed a tomb, and seen 6 Wesen cadets, all of them past the point where the lean's record said a cadet could survive, sitting fed and alive among growing things, being provisioned by a low-yield contaminant with dirt to the elbows. And he had ordered the chamber opened, because the trial his whole science was built on had stopped meaning anything, and he needed, I think, to stand inside the place where it had stopped. The wall sealed open, and the flat outside light poured in over the green, and cultivation master Os walked down into the dead chamber that was no longer dead, and he stood among my beans with his long dark hands not folded for the first time since I had known him, just hanging at his sides, open, the way Surium's hands had hung when he was empty, and he looked at the growing things for a long time before he looked at me. "Explain it," he said, not a command, almost a plea. The most powerful person at Tal Vesh asking the dirt thing to explain how the world worked. So I explained it. I stood in the wreckage of his test, in the green ruin of his deprivation, and I explained soil and seed and season, compost and root and rot, the small lives I had carried 10,000 light years in a satchel, the fermentation that had broken the wall between what I could grow and what they could eat, the whole slow green machinery I had grown up inside, and had tried to explain to him in the lecture pit 2 months before in 3 words because I had thought he would smile. He did not smile. "We measure provisioning," he said slowly when I had finished, "by how much can be stretched from a finite store." He was speaking, I realized, not to me but to himself, to the statues in the great hall, to a million years of Vesson who had built printers to escape the dirt. "We have always measured it so. The greatest among us are the ones who can make a small supply last." He looked at my corner, my third of the chamber, my piles, my surplus running back into the recycler. "You did not stretch a finite store. You made an infinite one. There is no name for that in our science. There is no statue for it." He turned his head toward me and did not turn it aside. "We have been training cadets for 1,000 years in how to starve more slowly, and you have shown me in a room we built to make you starve that the question was wrong." I did not know what to say to that, so I said the truest thing I had, which was a thing my grandmother used to say in the cold with her hands in the dirt, while the wind tried to take the orchard and failed again. "You don't beat hunger by needing less," I said. "You beat it by growing more. Everybody figures out the first one. It's the second one that keeps a people alive." They changed the curriculum. Not all at once and not gracefully, and not without a great deal of institutional pain that I was mostly spared the worst of by being, in the end, a contaminant they could not quite bring themselves to fully ennoble. But they changed it. There is a growing track at Tal Vesh now, I am told. A small strange department where Vesson cadets learn to put their long hands in soil and tend the rot they spent a million years fearing. And the fermentation method I worked out in a dead chamber is taught there under a name that is not mine, which I do not mind. Because a method that feeds people does not need my name on it any more than the seed needs to know who planted it. The lean still runs. They could not give up the lean. It was too deep in them. But it is not only a test of stretching anymore. Now a cadet can also pass it by doing what I did, by walking into the dead room and making it live. And I am told, I do not know if it is true, that more of them choose that path every year. Surium writes to me. I would not have believed it. The most arrogant person I ever met who tried to kill my pile in the dark sends me messages across 10,000 light years, formal and stiff and careful, asking after the orchard, asking after the upland collective, asking once in a message that must have cost him something to send, whether I thought a Vesson could ever truly understand growing things or whether it would always be, for his kind, a method learned and not a thing known. I told him the truth, which is that I do not know, that I was raised in it and he was not, and that this is a real difference and not a small one. But I told him also that my grandmother was not born knowing the orchard either, that she learned it from her hands, year on year, failure on failure, frost on frost, and that the orchard did not care that she had learned it rather than known it. The orchard only cared that she came back every spring and planted. The ground does not check your pedigree. The ground checks whether you show up. I am back in the cold uplands now. The manifest that misfiled me was corrected, eventually, with the same bland indifference that had broken it, and Tal Vesh had no further use for a contaminant who had unmade its central science, and I had no further desire to be a statue they did not know how to carve. So I came home. I keeper the seed vault. I work the orchard collective. My hands are still dirt black to the elbow most days, and they ache more than they should for 24, because 2 months of building piles in a dead chamber on a starving body takes something out of you that does not fully come back, and there are scars on my palms from the salvaged slats in the frames I built and rebuilt, and sometimes in the cold the old strain in my fingers reminds me of the place. I do not mind. A farmer's hands are a record. These ones say I once grew a garden in a room built to kill me, and fed 6 people who were not my people, and broke a wall 1,000,000 years old with a jar of fermented beans, and then came home and planted, in the spring, the way you do. People ask how I did it when the story reaches them, and they want it to be grand, and I let them down on purpose. There was no destiny. There was a corrupted manifest and a satchel of dirt and a grandmother's voice, and the one true thing I know, which is the only thing I have ever known, which is not a secret and never was, though a whole brilliant species had engineered themselves into forgetting it. You do not survive the lean by needing less. You plant,